Very nice. Okay. All right, everybody. So this is another one of the Wellness Institute webinars in our continuing series here. Today, it's ingredients for a healthier tomorrow. So the Wellness Institute dietitian Laura Creek Newman is here. Thank you very much, Laura. And she is here for about a 15-minute presentation on setting up ingredients for a healthy tomorrow, and then time for an extensive Q&A afterwards. So throughout the presentation, if anybody has any questions related to this stuff, please just fire it off in the chat field there, and we will be getting to those for sure. But why don't we kick it off? And Laura, you are on deck here. So make sure to.
Awesome.
Perfect.
All right, I'm just getting my my screen to show up here. Okay, excellent. So welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. As Darin mentioned, my name is Laura Creek Newman. I'm the dietitian here at the Wellness Institute. And the big reason I wanted to do this today is that March is Nutrition Month. So some of you might have been familiar with that. Maybe some of you, this is the first time you're hearing of it, but March, every year we celebrate nutrition and all things nutrition, and there's always a theme for Nutrition Month. And I really love the theme this year, and the theme is the same name as our presentation, Ingredients for a Healthier Tomorrow. So I'm going to go through just very briefly some of the main points of this theme this year, and then like Darin said, we'll get to the Q&A. And just fun fact, this year is actually the 40th anniversary of Nutrition Month. So Dietitians of Canada, the National Dietitian Association, has been running Nutrition Month campaigns in one form or another for 40 years now. So it's great too that we have a view for the future in this month as we look back on the past of Nutrition Month. So let's get into it today. Nope. Of course. Okay, there we go. Got the screen to change. All right. So for any of you who are familiar with Nutrition Month, you might know that there's always a theme, as I mentioned, and oftentimes we're looking at individual ingredients or health conditions or foods or something, and we're often looking at the individual level. This year's theme is really exciting because we're trying to take a really big picture view of nutrition. So a lot of this theme is talking about not just what we can do for ourselves and our individual choices, but how we all fit together, how nutrition affects all of us and the systems that affect us and support our nutritional health as well. So I'm going to start with talking about a few of the bigger picture parts of the nutrition system, which is really important because we all want to understand how we fit together. And then we'll come down to, for ourselves, what we can do for a healthier tomorrow for ourselves as well. Okay, so one of the big themes that we really want to give a little bit more time and emphasis this year is food security. And given the events of the last couple of years and even over the last few weeks with the political climate in the world, this is something that has been affecting many people for a long time, but has become even more of a day-to-day issue for a lot of people. So for anyone who's not familiar, the idea of food security is making sure that everybody gets enough to eat. So people who are food insecure means that they don't have enough to eat or enough of a variety to eat to meet all of their needs. And as you can see in the picture here, that exists on a bit of a spectrum. And I'm not a food security expert here, but I want to bring it forward because it's something that affects many of us. From 2017-2018 data, we found that more than 14% of Manitobans or Manitoba households were food insecure a decent amount of the time, and that number increases exponentially when we look at northern or remote communities. So this is something that affects a lot of people here in our province. And we know too that food security is something that affects many people throughout their lives to one degree or another. So when it comes to good nutrition for ourselves for today and for tomorrow, the first thing we have to look at is getting enough to eat. And that doesn't just mean like enough calories, but it also means that everyone gets enough of all of the nutrients that they need to meet their needs. This is such an important thing for community health and well-being of all of us. When we aren't getting enough food, or when we are not sure about where our food comes from, this impacts our health in many ways. Of course, it increases our risk for nutrient deficiencies, but it also increases our risk for chronic diseases, and it makes it harder to manage those chronic diseases if we already have them. It reduces our quality of life significantly, and it increases stress for people when we don't know where our next meal is coming from, or if we have to make choices about if we get to eat or how much we get to eat to make sure that there's food for later. So we want to work towards food security for all so that no one has to deal with this, to support better overall health and nutrition for everybody. This is an important thing. And now, of course, this is a big systemic thing. So individual choices don't necessarily lead to better food security, but we are all part of this food system, and food security is something that affects all of us when we look at community well-being and quality of life. A very similar idea that is really important to highlight too is the idea of food sovereignty. And this is something that I think fewer people are familiar with. This goes along with the idea of food security. So it really does, it's the same as believing that we need enough food for everyone. Food sovereignty is the idea, or it's a way of organizing food systems so that food is a fundamental right for all people, whereas right now in our food system, it isn't always that way. So we put the need for food first. And this makes so much sense because if we think about it, there are almost 8 billion people on the planet right now. We have so many different cultures and backgrounds and beliefs in that. But one of the few things that unites us all is that we need to eat. We all need to eat. And food is a big part of our lives. And one way or another, we're all connected through our food and our food systems. So food sovereignty is about believing that food is a fundamental right to everybody, for everybody. And it's a way of organizing systems so that everybody involved, not just the food producers, not just the companies, not the governments, but the individuals and communities all have a voice and a say and have some level of control over it. And that's really, really important because we find when we are separated from our food, we actually are less healthy as individuals and communities and countries. So the idea of food sovereignty, this is something that we really want to bring to the forefront. Food sovereignty also helps to make sure that foods that are appropriate and culturally relevant and important are available for people. And I love this idea of food sovereignty because one of the things that we really see when we look at research on the huge scale populations is that there are many, many, many ways to eat well. There are so many different diet patterns and hundreds and thousands of different foods out there. And there is no one right way to eat, right? Each person will find a pattern that clicks for them, that works in their lives and their culture, but there is no one right way to eat. And food sovereignty really celebrates this, saying that, our local food customs and food cultures, wherever we happen to be in the world, there are ways of nourishing ourselves well with whatever food is appropriate for us and that we grew up with. So I really love that idea. And I think all of us too can take that message, and that can help us feel a little bit more confident and engaged in our eating as well, when we feel like, okay, there isn't one right way to eat, so there are lots of ways to nourish myself well, and I can do it in a way that feels right to me and my culture. When we think about the future too, food sovereignty isn't just about making sure there's food on the table today, but it's about building a system that's going to allow for there to be food on the table for everybody far into the future. So it really emphasizes building skills and knowledge as well in future generations, and maintaining the power within those generations to feed themselves and their communities well. So this really morphs into the next point, that sustainable food systems is so, so important. We can't have food security and food sovereignty if we don't have food systems that are sustainable. And again, this is something that on an individual level, our choices do make an impact, but we are looking systemically. where this ties into Nutrition Month is that dietitians and researchers and health boards are really tuning our food recommendations into the idea of sustainability here. Because we do know that the recommendations that we make to the public and our food choices, they will impact our ecosystems, right? It will impact our environment. And then our environment will impact what's available to us and how we do that. So in order to have health, not just today, but for generations to come, sustainability in our food choices and in our food systems is a really key component here. So a really great example of this is how I'm sure many of you have noticed a shift towards recommending more plant-based eating. And I want to say just briefly, plant-based eating doesn't mean that everyone should eat only plants and no animal products. The idea behind plant-based eating is supporting a diet that is mostly made of plants, less heavily processed, and reducing the total amount of animal products. And some people may choose to still eat animal products, some people may choose not to. There's a lot more that we can go into later, but the reason I bring this up is because we see that for both human health and for ecological health, the plant-based eating really does support both of those. It's a real win-win. So that's where some of those recommendations are starting to come together. We want to be aware of how our food recommendations are going to impact everybody, and do it so that not just ourselves, but our children's children can be just as healthy as we are today. And then the last couple of points in our Nutrition Month Ingredients for a Healthier Tomorrow theme here is bringing all of this down to the individual level. Awareness of those systemic things and advocating whenever we can, making our voices heard to support equitable and sustainable food systems and food justice. This is so important. But there are things that we can do for ourselves as well for a healthier tomorrow. Food literacy is one of those things. And this is that idea of, really understanding our food, the food labels, all of those types of things. And this is really, really important, that we feel like we understand what's being served to us, that we understand what is being marketed to us in many ways. So food literacy can help us feel more empowered and confident in our eating. When we are unsure of what's in a food or how it relates to our health conditions or just general well-being, that creates extra stress and uncertainty, and that is not great for health overall. So food literacy, helping each individual understand what is out there in food, is so important for all of us. So some examples of food literacy are, for example, understanding food labels. And there was a question that came in about that, so I can talk more about that if you'd like. And just understanding what they're telling us and then how that relates to us. That's really important. One big area where where food literacy is becoming more and more important is helping us all understand or develop a keen eye for noticing when we're being marketed to, being aware of scare tactics, or just keeping our eyes open for things that might be misleading. There is so much information out there when it comes to nutrition and food and health, and having the skills to sift through that information and feel confident and able to understand, okay, this is a trustworthy source or this is not. That's a really important thing for all of us to be able to kind of get through past the noise as well. Food literacy also includes things like our general nutrition skills. So understanding what balanced eating is, rather, and having those basic meal planning and preparation skills. That's really important for all of us. And then being able to pass it on to the next generation as well, these skills. And then as for nutrition care, that's where the one-on-one time with a dietitian like myself comes in. So nutrition care may not solve all of the big problems, and we do recognize that. There is a place where dietitians can really come in, and especially if we're trying to manage a few different conditions or we're trying to create a nourishing food environment in our household, that's where getting that nutrition care one-on-one or in a group setting, whatever makes sense for you, that can be really, really helpful and part of your healthier tomorrow. So dietitians, our job largely isn't just to repeat nutrition information that's out there. Our job and what we really want to do is to help you translate all of that information and recommendations into things that make sense in your life, and to be there for support and strategizing and ideas and that as well, so that it becomes something meaningful and actionable in each person's life. So that was a really brief overview of this year's theme with that. I encourage you, if you saw any topics on here or ideas on here that piqued your interest, I encourage you to look it up some more, especially around food security or food sovereignty. There are some great websites like Food Secure Canada that is an excellent resource and helps us learn a little bit more about how we are all part of this food system and how we really are connected with it. Okay, so with all that in mind, thank you for your attention so far. I know many of you have questions that you'd like me to answer, so I am going to open the floor to the questions. I'm going to stop showing my screen here. One second. Okay. Oops. Okay, can everybody see me here? Hopefully, or hear me at least? Okay, just bear with me.
Sorry,
Okay.
yes, we can hear you. Yes, just fine.
Okay. Can we make it so that we can see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay.
Your full screen.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so we can see my screen still?
No, we just
No,
see you.
just me. Okay, good. Sorry, everybody. Thanks for your patience here. Every webinar application is a little different, so it's just figuring that. Okay. So I'm going to start with some of the pre-submitted questions here, and I do see that there's a few that have come in through the chat. So thank you, everybody. I hope to get through them all. I'll do my very best. Okay. All right. So the first question that I'm going to tackle is, are there any special foods that would help to relieve arthritis? Oh, excellent, excellent question. I know many, many people are dealing with this. So when it comes to foods and nutrition, occasionally there are foods that can really make an impact on certain health conditions. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it isn't. Arthritis is one of those kind of tricky ones that I would say there's some reasonable evidence that certain eating patterns can be supportive of well-being when it comes to arthritis. However, in terms of actually, say, relieving pain or stiffness, we really don't have the evidence for that for any one food. So in general, for anyone who's dealing with arthritis, there's a few things that we want to look at. An antioxidant-rich diet is really key. So basically what that means is lots of fruits and vegetables and lots of deeply colored fruits and vegetables. We're going to get lots of vitamins from that. And then we get those antioxidants, which is good for helping to balance the inflammatory response, which makes more pain and stiffness and that. So any type of fruit or vegetable, but especially the deeply colored ones, that's going to be a great option for you. We want to make sure we're getting enough protein in as well, plant-based or animal-based, but good quality protein. And especially for anyone who's dealing with osteoarthritis, so that's where the joints have worn down a bit. One of the things that's really helpful with that is keeping our muscles around those joints really nice and strong so that they can take some of the pressure off the joints. And of course, our muscles, they're made of protein. So getting protein in regularly through the day, that can be really, really helpful as well making sure that we're getting things like meat, fish, poultry, those are your animal sources, or dairy, eggs. And then things like beans, lentils, chickpeas, nuts, and seeds. These are all excellent sources of protein, so getting those in regularly through the day. Lastly, I would encourage really emphasizing unsaturated fats, particularly omega-3 fats. So this is, if anybody's familiar with fish oils or salmon, those are excellent sources of omega-3. We can get it from many foods. And the reason that we like those omega-3s is that again, they help to balance out that inflammatory response. So a lot of Canadians don't always get enough omega-3s. So by getting a little bit more of them, it can help our body do its best to balance that inflammatory response there. So those are the general things that we want to look at. Lots of those fruits and vegetables, deeply colored, good sources of protein through the day, and then the omega-3 fats. And you can get those through, like I said, so fatty fish, if you choose to eat that, things like salmon or mackerel, other types of seafood, getting those at least twice a week. We can also get it through plant-based sources. So things like chia seeds, flax seeds, walnuts, canola oil, soybeans. These are excellent sources, and we want to actually encourage those on a daily basis or multiple times a day if you want to do that. Okay, so I hope that's helpful for a starting place for helping to support our joint health with arthritis. Okay, next question. So can you please discuss non-acidic foods, sorry, and does high pH water counteract acidic effects of foods in our body? Oh, good question. There's lots of talk about acidity and, you know, alkalizing foods and things like that. So this is, where do I start with this one? There's a few things that get lost in some of the talk around acidic versus non-acidic foods in the body. So the actual pH or acidity or alkalinity of a food doesn't really translate into how that food is metabolized in our bodies and whether or not it makes like a net acid or a net base in our bodies. So just in general, most foods have an acidic pH. That means a pH lower than 7. Very few foods have a pH higher than 7. So most foods are somewhat acidic. Now you have very acidic things like lemon juice, for example, and you have very non-acidic things like cooked rice, for example. And those are pretty different foods there. In general, in terms of keeping our body pH or acidity in its where it should be, our body is very, very good at doing this. It has multiple systems. Your kidneys are really, really good at doing this. And also your breathing, your lungs help keep your pH, your body pH in check. So the body is going to keep its blood pH or blood acidity in a healthy range all the time. So what you eat doesn't really affect that part of it. Now, where the acidity or alkalinity of foods comes in is how, like I was talking about, those metabolic or metabolism breakdown products, whether foods get broken down into acidic things or into alkaline basic things. And that does seem to be a bit of it's an emerging area of research, and that can have an effect on, say, chronic disease progression, especially in things like kidney function, for example. So what we find is that diets that are high in grains, especially refined grains, but especially foods that are high in high salt foods and high in animal products, these diets tend to make more of those acid breakdown products in the body. And those can be, we find that when there's lots of those acid breakdown products, over time that can increase our risk for different chronic diseases. On the flip side, we find that a lot of foods, especially fruits and vegetables of any kind, nuts and seeds and legumes, so beans, lentils, chickpeas, those make alkaline or basic breakdown products in our bodies, and that helps to balance out the acid made by the other foods and can help to reduce our risk of chronic diseases in the future. So when we're thinking of those things, we want to look at the balance of the scales tipping towards those basic, alkaline breakdown products to help protect ourselves. It doesn't mean we can't eat any of the grains or animal products. It just means we want to tip the scales towards the alkaline breakdown products. So I hope that's all making sense so far. So high pH water, no, it's not really going to do anything to counteract those acidic effects. And high pH water still isn't really that high pH. Where we're really going to see those effects changing is looking at the makeup of our diet. So the more plant-based, the more of those fruits, vegetables, legumes we eat compared to the heavily processed foods, excess grains, and lots of animal foods. That's what's going to keep that acid-base balance and lower risk of chronic disease there. So hopefully that was helpful and helped answer some of those things. Okay. Okay. So next question here. This is a really timely question. So any tips for anyone who's on a low or fixed income to get good nutrition, especially when produce prices have escalated so high? A lot of healthy foods are out of budget for a lot of people. Incredibly timely, and I'm sure you're not alone. Again, a lot of people, even in the last 4 weeks or so, are really starting to feel the pinch as those prices go up. The first thing is to recognize that you're doing the best that you can with it. Even just asking these types of questions, I really hear that you are invested in your health, and you're trying to be creative and all of that. And so that's really, really impressive. And so sometimes we want to give ourselves that grace for doing the best that we can with what's available. In general, we want to look for the things that are going to be lower cost, of course, but my go-to is always things like our canned or frozen produce. If fresh is out of the price range, canned or frozen is definitely the way to go. They're just as nutritious as the fresh options. Texture-wise, they're a bit different, so you might have to be a little bit more creative. But those are my go-to for anybody really, but those are really the ones that I would recommend looking at. So when we want to get produce in there, you're going to get just as much nutrition if you have it from frozen or if you open up a can of something like that. Whenever possible, and usually it is, looking for things that don't have added salt to them, and especially in the cases of fruits, trying to keep things with limited added sugars. So, looking for fruits canned in juice versus in syrup, those types of things there. If you're open to it, things like our plant-based proteins are a really affordable option. So that's like our beans, lentils, chickpeas. Again, your canned options are really easy to use, and they're just as nutritious as the dried options. So in terms of preparation, the dried ones are often a barrier for a lot of people because of time and equipment and that. So if you're open to using things like canned options, that's a great way to get not just your protein in, you're also going to get a great amount of fiber. You're going to get lots of vitamins and minerals that are really heart healthy in there as well from those types of options. So if there's a way to use those in your cooking a little bit more, that's something I would look at. Especially, meat prices have been going up for a long time, and these are a great option for helping to stretch that meat a little bit more. So lentils, for example, are something that a lot of people find helpful to add into ground beef dishes to help stretch out the beef a little bit, and they're a lot more affordable than more of that. So if you're not already doing things like buying in bulk when possible, or using apps for either sales, or there are apps as well that have more discounted fruits and vegetables as well. So that's something I let you know about that if you haven't heard about them. It's something that you might find at your local grocery store. So these are fruits and vegetables that are generally in reasonable condition, but need to be sold pretty quickly. They're not going to last on the shelf as long, so you can look at those types of things. Again, availability will vary with that. So doing the best that you can with what's available to you, and remembering too that nutrition isn't about any one food, and there isn't one right way to eat well. So doing whatever is available to you, that is going to contribute to your nutrition. So if you do have the option to say choose some whole grain things, for example, with breads and things like that, those are pretty they're pretty much the same price for the white version versus the whole grain version. So that would be one that I would recommend looking at to get our fiber in and some of those nutrients from the whole grains. And then using the preserved, the frozen, the canned produce and the plant-based proteins as much as possible, just to help stretch that dollar a little bit. Yeah, so I hope that is helpful for you as well there. Okay. So speaking of that, next question is, it can feel kind of difficult to eat well sometimes, especially when we are preparing food for other people. So if someone is saying they live with someone who is a meat and potatoes eater and tends to prefer highly processed or white foods, and getting vegetables or fruits in is difficult. So how do we balance our own plant-based diet needs because of our health issues, for example, to maintain healthy eating, without having to prepare multiple meals? Oh, that's such a challenge for so many people. You know, when we live with different people, we don't all get along the same when it comes to food, and that can be a real stressor for a lot of us. And you're absolutely right, spending all day cooking to make different meals for everybody is exhausting, and most people don't have the time or desire to do that. So this is one where, if at all possible, I encourage people living in households to have some conversations around what types of foods are going to be available, and having a bit of give and take, and really being open with what each person really wants or really needs out of it, out of their eating pattern, rather. So seeing where each person is, and then seeing if there is any middle meeting ground on this. Whenever possible, I definitely recommend making one meal. However, we can have multiple options at that meal, especially if certain people have, let's say, very selective palates or very strong likes or dislikes. One strategy that can be really helpful for families or households can be to make sure that there's at least one thing on the table that each person will eat, and then vary some of the other things. So if in this situation here, we want to be having a more plant-based diet, but meat is a necessary thing for somebody else, they're not willing to go plant-based, I'm curious if maybe there's a way to prepare some of each for that person. Same thing, like if some people in the family don't want any vegetables and that, but maybe you do, perhaps we can reach a point where, or a decision where vegetables are available for anybody who wants it. And this is one too where we want the best for our households, especially if we are the person who holds the responsibility for preparing foods. It's part of our caregiving nature, and we really want to see our loved ones eat well. And so it can be really hard to see people choosing or not choosing certain things, and especially if it doesn't align with our own preferences. We can, however, it can be really important to take a moment, and especially for a situation where everybody is an adult in the household who's capable of making decisions for themselves, recognizing where those boundaries are and saying, you know, I want this for people, however, they are an adult and they make choices around that. So we can be cognizant of people's desires and understand that they might prefer certain things. However, there should be some give and take in the household, and also recognizing that at a certain point, I make my decisions and they make their decisions. So in a situation where we have different people, I would probably, different people that need or have very strong different tastes here, like we have meat and potatoes and we have plant-based. I would say, you know, making plants of some kind a part of the basic meal, just as a baseline, that might be a starting place for someone. So it's up to each person whether they choose to eat the fruits or vegetables available. However, they are available for everybody. And then as for the other items, that's where perhaps we can have some compromise in things. We can look at perhaps there might be a way of alternating. One day we have a more processed starch, and then the next day we have a less processed starch. Or perhaps another option might be saying having say a whole grain at all meals, but also having white bread available most of the time, as if that's something that somebody would like. These are just ideas. These aren't to say that's how we should definitely do it. Everybody's different, but these are ideas that might be helpful for people. So we're kind of adding options to that meal and not having to make completely separate meals. When it comes to the proteins, if we have someone who's a very strong meat eater and someone who really wants to avoid meat, that does get a little bit trickier. And sometimes we do need to make a couple of different dishes. But in that case, we might want to look at things like doing some batch cooking, so that we say make enough meat one day for today and tomorrow, and then tomorrow we cook enough of the plant-based one for that day and the day after, and then we can serve both at each meal, if that makes sense. So we're only cooking once a day, but we have leftovers for the other person. That, again, that's an idea, but that's how I might look at it. So adding variety, making plants, especially fruits and vegetables, available for anybody who wants it, and doing a bit of compromising. With doing a bit of compromising with that. Okay. I think there was one more question that I wanted to just do really quickly here. Sorry, bear with me. Okay. And okay, right. This is a really good question here. So how do you work out a healthy relationship with treats? One where we're not feeling guilty every time we have a dessert. Or it's difficult to, when to give in and when to say no. That's a really tough question for a lot of people. And it's one that is really hard for us to figure out in our food environment here, where we live in a food environment where food is really moralized. So we have good foods, we have bad foods, we have clean foods, we have dirty foods, we all have all these kinds of things. And that certainly can make us feel really, really hard to have a balanced relationship with things, with treats. So one of the things that we want to do is try to understand why we feel guilty every time we do have a certain food. And that can actually be a really deep question and a tough one to answer a lot of the time. So that's one that we want to get a little bit of a sense of why am I feeling guilty as it is. The other thing we want to remember is that our nutrition, our health, our well-being, our body composition, all these things, they're not made or broken by any one food or even any one meal. Our nutritional health is really about patterns and long-term patterns that we have. So with nutrition research and recommendations, we're taking that long-term view for things. So any one, say, piece of cake is like a blip. It's like a drop in the ocean, if you will, of the overall pattern with things. So we generally do see that things like what we would typically call treat foods can be included in a healthy eating pattern. And we want to look at the frequency of things as well. So if we are seeing, say, a more frequency of those cakes or treats, whatever you want to call it for that, and we're not happy with that, let's take a look at understanding what's going on with that pattern there. What role do those foods play for us? And one of the things that sometimes can get in the way is that we feel like we shouldn't like them. And that's really tough because these are foods that we are, evolutionarily made to like. Sweets, treats, all those things. We really are meant to like these foods. So we're human for liking sweets and treats and that's the way that our brains evolved, okay? So giving ourselves some of that grace that, hey, yeah, they do taste good to us. And it's not a bad thing that they taste good. We're not a failure. Like that's human. So I hope that's helping to answer that question a little bit. So it can help to understand, why am I feeling guilty? And also, what are my patterns here? And what's behind those patterns there? What role are those foods playing in my life right now? So if we're trying to understand when to when to have those types of things and when not to, we know, that's where we can spend some time kind of tuning in to what role those are playing. Think about the language we use when we think about that relationship. If we feel like we are, so I just want to bring out that language, something like giving into treats. That means that we are somehow not strong enough. That means we're using language as though we're doing something bad. So think about how that might set up our ability to enjoy that treat and actually feel satisfaction from it and feel satiated. If we don't have great satisfaction and satiation, and especially if we feel we've been bad in a way, then that affects our mental well-being, and it can actually make us want that more or go into it more, because now we feel, oh, I've blown it. So take a look at our language around that. So maybe some things like thinking of, okay, I'm not necessarily giving in. Maybe I'm choosing to have this, or I want to enjoy this. So that's something that, if you have a lot of questions around that, that's the kind of thing I love to chat with people about, because it really affects our day-to-day life. But for a starting place, thinking about why we're feeling guilty, and then reminding ourselves that we are human to enjoy these things, and that nutrition isn't about any one treat or anything like that. It's about the long game and our patterns. Okay, so I am going to take a look at some of the questions on here. Okay, bear with me. I think we have a couple. What should we be planting this spring? Oh my goodness, that is an excellent question. I love gardening, but I'm not entirely sure. I'd say plant whatever you enjoy having. Whatever you like to have. Sorry, I can't be of more help with that one. I apologize. Okay. Okay, next question. What are your thoughts on the increased use of coconut oil? Great question. Coconut oil is very high in saturated fat. It is very low in unsaturated fat, and it has no omega-3 fats in it. So if we were to use coconut oil in most things, we would be missing out on some of those really heart-healthy omega-3 fats and really heart-healthy unsaturated fats. And we do see that depending on the rest of the diet, high coconut oil intake can affect our cholesterol levels as well. So if that's something that you're concerned about or you already have issues with, I wouldn't recommend adding a lot of coconut oil. That being said, using it as one of several types of fats in our diet, especially in places where it tastes really good or we really need the texture, again, that's where this nutrition is all about, the long-term patterns. So some coconut oil would be okay, but I wouldn't recommend using it to replace all other fats. What about GMOs? So genetically modified organisms, GMOs, our best evidence shows that they are safe to consume. There's actually very few crops that are GMO right now. So you'll see GMO free on many food labels. Unfortunately, that's misleading advertising, because very few, for example, fruits and vegetables are actually GMO right now. So our best evidence shows that they're actually better for sustainability in some cases, because they're bred to be pest resistant, and nutrient content, they're the same, or actually sometimes a little bit better than non-GMO products. So I don't have any concerns about GMOs. From the best research that we have right now is that it's healthy to choose those. Similarly with organic, again, organic is a way of farming. There are reasons why we may or may not want to do organic. However, there's like everything, there are some ups and downs with it. So it is much more expensive. It's also, for the consumer, it also has lower yields in some cases, depending on the crop as well. So in terms of productivity, that's something. Nutrient-wise, organic and non-organic are identical. There's no difference in when we research the two, when we do the nutrient composition. So nutrition-wise, they're exactly the same. If you choose to do organic for ethical reasons or something like that, that's a choice you can make, but nutrition-wise, they're exactly the same. Okay. 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 Quick question here. Why do bottles of wine, etc., not have nutrition labels? Oh, good question. I I don't have a good answer for that yet. It is the federal government that decides which foods need nutrition labels and which don't. Alcohol, for some reason, is excluded from that, and that is really frustrating for people because it would be nice to know what is in our alcohol, especially for things like ingredients. If anybody has, for example, you know, they want to know some of their ingredients for preservatives or something like that. So that is something that the federal government, I'm going to guess, there's probably some lobbying happening somewhere that, you know, alcohol got excluded from that. Also, alcohol is not really, while it is calories and it is something that we consume, it's not considered food in the same way as, you know, crackers are. And so then I think that has something to do with it as well. So it does make it a little bit more difficult for things as well. Okay. What recommendations do you have for people who have osteoporosis or are thinking about that? Excellent question. Osteoporosis affects a lot of people, thinning of the bones, weakening of the bones, and what we're trying to do is reduce fracture risk. So when we think of bones, we always think of calcium, getting enough calcium in a day. So for most people, that's somewhere between 800 and 1,000 milligrams of calcium a day. If you are over 70, or if you have a family history of osteoporosis, you might be looking at more like 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams a day. Calcium is a big one. We can get calcium from our dairy products. We can also get it from things like fish with bones in it. We can get it from veggies like dark leafy greens, and we can get it from some of our nuts and seeds and beans and things like that as well. So high calcium diet. Getting enough protein is another one that's really important. Again, just like we need that protein to strengthen muscles to protect bones from arthritis, strong muscles, getting enough protein helps to keep our bones as strong as possible as well, to prevent fracture risk. So getting protein in regularly through the day, and protein helps our body absorb more calcium as well. So that's really important. Vitamin D is a huge one, especially we're just coming out of winter. Well, not quite today, but here in Manitoba, 6 months out of the year, we can't make enough vitamin D from the sun. We're just too far away from the sun. Plus, we've got parkas on and that. So getting enough vitamin D every day is really important, especially if we're over the age of 70 or if we have reduced mobility. So that one's one that we often will do with a supplement because it's just a lot more consistent to do it that way. So those are 3 of the big ones in bone health, okay? Then we also have smaller players like vitamin K, which we get from our leafy greens and from some fermented foods. We also have things like magnesium, which we get most of our magnesium from things like fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds, legumes, and grains. So again, the more plants in your diet, the more magnesium you're gonna get as well. So those are the nuts and bolts of it. Great question. Okay, next question. What are dietitians' beliefs regarding meds for cholesterol versus a low cholesterol type diet? Oh, great question. So I think that there is a role for both, and and that's based on the research that really does show that it's not about one or the other. It's about which or what combination might be best for each person. So we know that our cholesterol levels and our risk for cardiovascular disease and things like heart attack and stroke are somewhat related to lifestyle and also largely related to our genetics, our family history of these things. So we do see that diet patterns like the Mediterranean diet and high fiber types of diets and that can lower cholesterol levels. The portfolio diet as well can lower cholesterol levels, similar to low doses of certain cholesterol medications. However, they may not be achievable for some people, or just depending on our genetics, it might not be enough to lower our cholesterol enough. Okay, so I often find that that diet is a great starting place, because not only will it help with cholesterol, but we're going to get all sorts of other nutrients that just support well-being, brain health, bone health, joint health as well. So you're going to get lots of really good nutrition from following these heart healthy diets. Then from there, you may find that you might benefit from cholesterol meds in addition to the diet. So I think that they really work well together. The decision to start a medication or not should be based on your risk, your ability with different things, what's available to you, and those conversations should be had with your care team. Okay. Okay. Just a second here. Okay. Okay, I think I have time for 2 more questions here. Okay, so quick question about carbs, how much you should eat daily so that you're not going to gain weight. Well, that one's a really tough question, because everybody's body does respond differently to our eating patterns on that. What I want to respond to this one a little bit more generally, just saying that carbs are more variable. Okay, we find that people can be healthy and well nourished on a variety of levels. Some people eat very high carbohydrate diets, some people eat very low carbohydrate diets. So there's a lot of flexibility in there. What we want to find is having those carbs in balance with the other nutrients. So if we're not, so we want to make sure that we're still getting enough protein, we're still getting those heart healthy unsaturated fats and that. So that carbs aren't taking the place of those things. We want to make sure that we're still getting lots of fruits and vegetables, those types of those nutrient powerhouses there as well. And then we look at the quality of the carbs too, because there are many different foods that qualify as carbs. So things such as simple, plain white table sugar, that's a carbohydrate, and cooked buckwheat, that is also a carbohydrate. I think we can all agree both of those things are very different in our, in terms of how they affect us, in terms of how full we feel, how satisfied we feel, how quickly it affects our blood sugar, those types of things. So looking at the balance of our meal, so trying to get some protein source in, getting some plants, some fruits and veggies, a good chunk of those, and then having carbs to kind of fill up the rest there. And then we want to look at the carbs that we eat, the quality of them. And by that, I mean the carbs that bring a lot of nutrition along with them. So more often, if we're eating those high fiber, less processed carbs, like whole grains or starchy root vegetables with the skin and those types of things, those are going to be very satisfying, and they tend to help keep our blood sugar in check, like more stable through the day, so we're not having spikes and drops. And that can help us to feel more satisfied in our eating. And we tend to have we tend to find an eating pattern that kind of keeps us stable here. So we don't see big changes in our weight or our strength or well-being with that when we eat that way. So think of our diet pattern right now and think of how often we are having some of those high fiber carbohydrates, or think of how often we're having meals that include those different types of foods and nutrients there. And if we're not having those things that often, then maybe we could look for more balance, or maybe we could have a little bit more of those fruits and veggies in there. Ultimately, the amount of carbs we have is going to be up to us, up to each person based on energy and preferences. Okay. Okay. When it comes to questions about body weight changes and that, those are really, really tough questions. And that's the reason for that is that everybody is a little bit different, and what might result in a lot of changes for one person's body might not result in a lot of physical changes for another person's body. So for something, for example, like eating plant-based, for some people, they may notice a lot of changes when they switch to a plant-based diet. For other people, just based on genetics and other factors, they might not see any changes. So most diet patterns, let's think of diet patterns as much as possible as things that are there to support our nutritional well-being, right? For today and for tomorrow. our bodies and our body shape and size and that may change as things go along. They may not though. So we never really know exactly what to do. But if you are looking for more specific information, I would really recommend talking one-on-one with a dietitian about that, to see where we're at in our diet pattern right now and where you want to go. Okay. Great question really quickly about is it possible for dietitians and medical professionals to lobby the government regarding increasing food costs? Because that's a big factor for a lot of people, not being able to manage their health as well as they'd like because of this. Excellent question. There are roles for it. There are some dietitians that I know that I'm acquaintances with who are doing great work. They are working on boards and community organizations such as Winnipeg Food Council and Food Secure Canada and those types of things. So we definitely do have medical professionals and dietitians in those groups who are doing that lobbying. Dietitians of Canada does do some of that lobbying as well. Individual dietitians may or may not be able to do that based on where they work and some of their requirements and that. I know that's a really challenging place, but there are a lot of dietitians and more who are working in that. And more are using their social media platforms as well to call attention and call to action and join some of these causes. Because we really do recognize, I can talk about recommendations all I want, but at the end of the day, if food is unaffordable or unavailable for people, what good does that do, right? So that's where this theme for this year really comes into it, thinking of how we're all impacted by the food system and how we need some of those bigger changes, and dietitians are really working towards that. So thank you for bringing that up. You're absolutely right. And more dietitians are getting involved in those boards and communities. Okay. 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 And yeah, I think that's, oh, I had one more question here. Sorry. Okay, I guess it disappeared. Oh, there it is. Just very quickly, somebody asked, what are the ingredients in a vitamin D pill? Well, it's going to depend a little bit on what the fillers are. It usually uses some kind of a starch-based filler, and then the active ingredient is vitamin D. It's usually taken from an animal-based source, so it's made from animal byproducts. They just extract it chemically, or occasionally you can find vegetarian-based vitamin D that comes from either types of mushrooms, or I believe they can synthesize it from algae as well. I might be wrong on that one. But yeah, those are the basic ingredients in a vitamin D pill. The vitamin D that's in those pills is exactly the same as the vitamin D that our own body makes. So when you take it in, when you absorb it, your body doesn't know the difference. So they're very safe there. As for how you want to take it, it's up to you, whatever makes it more likely that you're going to take it. So if liquid is easier, they have vitamin D drops that are super simple to take. You can put it on food. They have chewables, they have gummies, they have tablets that you swallow. Whatever is going to make it easier for you to take it and more consistent. That's what I would say. So you can talk about those options with a pharmacist, or if you're working with a dietitian, they can help answer those questions as well. Okay, so it is 12:59, and I know we are all busy people, so I think I'm going to end it there for today. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and for your amazing questions. I really appreciate it. If you have any burning questions afterwards, feel free to contact us, and the message will get passed on to me, and I'll do my best to get back to you on that. So yes, thank you so much, everybody, and keep an eye out for our next webinar. I forget the date. Darin, what's the date of that one? Oh, he might not be there. Okay, well, in any case, we have a webinar coming up, so check your inboxes and your emails and everything. So
sorry, yeah, there is the next webinar is based on sleep, and I believe it is happening on the 12th of April. You can sign up at wellnessinstitute.ca/wellness webinars. Thank you very much for all your help here, Laura, and everybody have a fantastic afternoon.
Thanks. Take care, everybody. Happy Nutrition Month.
Bye.
And bye-bye.